This isn't a Bible argument. This isn't a feelings argument. This is about whether anything makes sense at all. Got it? All right. I trust you. God exists. And by the end of this video, he's going to show you why. Through me. Now, to start things off, I want you to ask yourself one question. This is the core question for this video. Let's cut through all of the fluff. Why does existence exist? Me and God have been working on this for a long time now, so it's something that I actually put into a 32-page paper that I will put in the link below that I am working from in this video, but I'm explaining it in a much simpler way for you guys to understand, because we can use some pretty heavy terms in the abductive proof. And to any atheists watching this video, welcome. We will be using the points that you guys have in this video. I will be referencing them. I will be going back to them. I will be using you guys' system and comparing them to the framework that God has relayed upon me and allowed me to work out. And we'll see how they compare. And I just want to let you know that I am going to make sure you do get your representation, because I know you guys will start commenting it if I don't. But all your responses and what if it's this or what if it's that is all going to be in this video. Why does anything exist at all? Not what exists, not how things operate. Why does existence exist? And why is your mind capable of understanding existence? If atheism is true, reality still has to explain being, consciousness, logic, and morality, not separately, but together as a coherent framework that doesn't contradict itself among any of the layers. And it's here that once you follow the chain all the way down, that something unavoidable shows up every single time in each of these categories. Being versus things. We're used to explaining things. Planets exist, people exist, atoms exist, thoughts exist. But here's the question that we never ask. What is existence itself? Everything that you can point to exists, but existence itself is not a thing. It doesn't weigh anything. It doesn't sit somewhere. Yet without it, nothing exists. How can nothing participate in existence if existence isn't the ground? Nothing can't serve as a cause, a condition, a container, because it can't participate in anything. It's nothing. If existence could begin, then there can't be nothing existing. You can't have nothing existing before existence, bro. It doesn't work. And so in order for there to be nothing, there has to be something. Think of it like a stack of cups, or like one of those Russian nesting doll eggs where you open one up and there's a little doll inside. You open that one up and there's a smaller one. You open that one up and there's a smaller one. Just think of that. You can only take off the top so many times until you get to the base. If there is no base, you don't get a stack of cups at the top. Much like the Russian nesting doll, you don't get the bigger doll if there is no tiny doll at the very bottom holding the whole entire thing up. This is me saying that reality isn't based on contingencies, that there has to be an eternal ground that grounds all of reality. It has to be infinite, because existence can't exist without having always existed. But we'll get there. Like I said, those stacks of cups need a base. It needs something that holds it up. Reality is the same way, because there is no cup at the bottom if it either wasn't always there or somebody didn't put it there. Whoever put it there had the ability to put something there that was infinite, meaning that person would have to be infinite. If everything that exists depends on something else to exist, then you get infinite regress with no foundation. At some point, existence must exist by necessity. Not by cause, not because somebody decided to create existence. It just had to have always existed. That necessary ground or reality is what philosophers have always meant to be God. Not a character, not Sky Daddy, being itself. The one whose being is knowledge. Still not exist. Nice wording and all, Crello, but still not super convinced, bro. I mean, okay, yes, there must be an infinite ground, I guess, but why does it have to be Christianity's God? Hold on, we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, let's talk about you. You don't just think. You know that you think. You don't just exist. You know that you exist. And then you can reflect on that knowing. I know. I know that I know. I know that I know that I know. This is called recursive awareness. In theory, you could infinitely go on forever saying, I know that I know, but you can't conceptualize it infinitely. And there lies the problem. A finite mind like you and I cannot ground an infinite level of self-knowing by itself. It's like recursion in a code. Without a base, the code crashes. It requires a source of knowing that doesn't need to be known by anything else in order to exist. A mind that is knowing itself. Not learned knowledge like you and I. Not processed information, but necessary self-existent awareness. That's not matter. That's not chemistry. That's mind. So let's talk about morality. Evolution can explain why certain behaviors help groups survive, for sure. It cannot explain why you ought to do the right thing even when it costs you. If morality was just survival instinct, there'd be no real difference between helping a stranger and exploiting someone when you know you can get away with it. Yet every human culture in history has wrestled with ought. Not preference, not convenience, obligation. When racial times in America were at a sky high, there were some white people who, against the better judgment of everybody else, literally fought for black people and risked their lives. Even though they knew that they could die, they fought for what was right. Right? If your morality is just a survival instinct, why would you do something that is going to cost you your very life? Why do you feel like you ought to do this thing? We say things like, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that, even when it benefits us. That ought is not physical. It's not chemical. It's not even measurable. It's a moral law. And laws require a lawgiver. Now, in anything in morality, you could just say, for the betterment of society, we should not kill. But I could keep asking you why over and over and over and over. And you could keep giving me a reason. And I could just keep saying why until we get to a base. Because if we don't, infinite regress is going to keep happening. Just like we said in the beginning, I know that I know that I know that I... The same thing is happening here when I'm asking why over and over again. When you tell me I shouldn't kill somebody. Why not? Because it's bad. Why? Because blah. Why should I care? Why? Until you get to an absolute. A ground. There has to be a ground for this. Otherwise, I can do whatever I want. Like, yeah, sure, you guys might say that I can't, but there is no ground for this stuff. So you guys are just making stuff up and we're all going with it. Like, not imposed rules, but a moral reality woven into existence itself. So far, I'm just trying to get you to flirt and feel comfortable with the idea of an infinite being or infinite mind. We have not yet got into specific religion. I am just talking about metaphysics, the actual fabric of reality, the actual base of what everything is. That's what I'm talking about in this very moment. Existence itself in an infinite mind or an infinite being grounding all of that reality. Now, with everything I just explained, when you start putting them together, it starts making the argument for God stronger. And this is actually where, remember how I said earlier that we were going to come back to it, atheists who are watching this video, we're going to come back to your point. This is that part right here where we're going to come back to it. When we start interlocking these things, it actually gets stronger for Christianity, but this is where it actually starts to fall apart for atheism. It's kind of odd. You know, when I was doing this research, I would notice that, you know, standalone, you know, there's a lot of arguments against some theistic viewpoints by atheists. But when you actually combine those rebuttals together, they fall apart under atheistic viewpoints, and they actually hold together much stronger under a theistic viewpoint. And I'm going to explain that. So you can try to explain consciousness as an emergent, morality as evolutionary, logic as a human tool, fine-tuning as a chance or multiverse, but you cannot explain all of them together without contradiction are invoking some sort of godlike force. Because each one presupposes the others. Logic presupposes mind. Science presupposes logic. Morality presupposes value. Consciousness presupposes awareness. You don't get rid of God. You replace him with a godlike structure that somehow exists necessarily, grounds reality, explains mind, explains law, and at that point, you're not arguing against God, you're arguing against the name. Let's make it simpler. Everything we've talked about so far needs some kind of base. The required base for existence is necessary. Like, existence has to have always existed. It needs to have always been. It's necessary for our lives today. So the required base for existence is necessary. The required base for logic is rationality. The required base for morality is good. Like, it has to be good. You know, that your morals, they gotta be good. So your required base for morality is good. And then your required base for knowledge is self-knowing. So when you ask yourself, what is necessary? What is mind? What is rational? What is good? What is self-knowing? Ladies and gentlemen, that is God. A necessary, rational, moral, self-knowing mind. That's God by definition. And with naturalism, when they try to combine them, this is what it looks like. Existence, brute fact, it just is. Which is still saying it has always been, but it just is. Your consciousness is an emergence. It's an emergence from your brain. Like that's what your consciousness is. That's all it is. Logic is human convention. Morality is social instinct. But here's the issue. These explanations contradict each other. If logic is human convention, then science collapses. If morality is subjective, then moral claims lose authority. Like, you can't say that's evil or what he's doing is evil. No, what you believe he's doing is evil. What he believes he's doing is good. And people can collectively come together and say that's bad, but that's just all what they think. It's not the truth. If consciousness is just an emergent and it's accidental, then reason isn't trustworthy. If existence is brute, it just is, then explanation itself is meaningless. Because if you say the universe just exists, nature selects for truth. Evolution favors morality. Consciousness emerges, meaning mind comes from non-mind. Then ask yourself, why does that system exist? And why is it creating self-aware conscious beings like you and I with rational thinking and logic? Like, why does that structure exist? You've just renamed God. And before people say this is God of the gaps, here's why it's not. A gap argument says we don't know X, therefore God. This is convergent. So this is basically just saying X, Y, Z, and W all require the same base. And unfortunately, nothing else fits but God. Like, it's not ignorance, it's ontological pressure. Reality is leaning towards one conclusion. And so if you're willing to accept any of that, and you're willing to accept necessary being, infinite mind, rational logos, moral good, and relational knowledge, then Christianity becomes coherent, not random. In the beginning was the word, logos. Logos isn't a sermon word. It's Greek metaphysics for rational ordering principle. And Christianity claims that being is personal, knowledge is relational, love is fundamental, and God is not distant. That matches our convergence perfectly. In Islam, you don't actually have the opportunity to know God on the level that you get to know him in Christianity. And it makes more sense why you would be able to know him in the way that Christianity describes, because if he is infinite knowing, then that doesn't stop at relational knowing. He is all levels of knowing. He doesn't suddenly hide himself. His knowing doesn't stop at you knowing him personally. He gives you the chance to know him because he's all levels of knowing. It completes the fullness of who he is. And Islam's version of God doesn't quite capture his fullness in the way that Christianity's does. And to take it one further, if reality has a necessary, rational, personal, and moral source, then it makes total sense that this source could enter history at any point. And Christianity doesn't claim that God stayed distant. It claims that being itself stepped into existence. That's why in Christianity, they say the word became flesh. And when Jesus is here, he doesn't just teach about morality. He teaches about alignment with being itself. Jesus basically says, I know that I know because I am known. Like when he comes, that's basically what he's saying. I am known by the Father. I can only do what I see my Father do. He's basically saying, I know that I know, like we do, because I am known by the infinite knower who sees me. Like at this point, this is where the question isn't, is there any evidence for God? It's, what else could possibly ground reality without secretly becoming God? God doesn't force belief. He doesn't snap his fingers and override your will, because relationship can't exist without freedom. You're allowed to ignore him, but you're not allowed to pretend that existence explains itself. And when people say, well, then how was God created? If we say that he was the necessary base of reality, he can't have been created because something would have needed to create that, and we would have never got a foundation in the first place. He has to be uncaused. He has to be the first that all other minds and things derive from. You cannot deny God without using the very tools that require him. You reason against reason's source. You trust consciousness while calling it accidental. You appeal to morality while denying moral reality. That doesn't feel like skepticism. That feels like metaphysical debt. Now let's take it back to the 4 pillars in case you forgot by now, so we can kind of recap. Existence, or why anything exists. All things exist contingently. A chain of contingent things cannot explain itself. Infinite regress does not ground reality, so you can't just, what created that? That created that. That created that. That created that. That created that. There has to be a ground. Therefore, existence itself must be necessary. No personality yet. No theology, just existence that exists by itself. Consciousness and why there's awareness. Matter has properties, mass, charge, and location. Matter does not contain aboutness. Consciousness is intentional. It's about things. And then self-reflection introduces infinite regress. I know that I know that I know. This requires a mind that does not depend on any other mind. Now, being isn't just existence. It must be mind. Logic and truth, why reason works. Logic is not physical. Logical laws are universal and invariant. They're discovered, not invented. And then even denying logic uses logic. This requires a rational ground of reality. Now necessary mind must be rational, consistent, and intelligible. And then D, why morality exists, or why oughts exist. Biology explains behavior, not obligation. Ought cannot be reduced to survival. Moral judgments claim universality. Even disagreement presupposes a standard that you have. So this requires a moral ground, not preference. A moral ground, a ground for morality. There has to be a ground. Now necessary rational mind must be good too, not just neutral. And as I said before, when you ask yourself what is good, what is self-knowing, and you go down that whole list, God is the only one that links all of those without contradicting itself across layers. And if you are in denial, I know there will be people who are still, and I don't hate you for that, but here's my question. What must already be true for denial to even be possible? If you say that reason is just a product of evolution, right? The reason is aimed at survival, not truth. But the moment you say, and therefore God doesn't exist, you're trusting reason to deliver truth, which is a contradiction. Because if reason is just adaptive wiring, false beliefs that help survival are just as valid. Truth has no special authority, and logic has no obligation to be correct. Yet a lot of the time, my atheist friends argue as if contradictions matter, consistencies matter, evidence matters. Because they do. Because those are normative standards, not evolutionary byproducts. You cannot get ought to be consistent from blind processes. To deny God, you must be conscious of your own thoughts. I know that I'm thinking about whether God exists. What I just said, that recursion that I just stated has no physical explanation. Like the neurons just fire, but my neurons are not about God. They are not about truth. They don't know that they fire. The moment somebody says, God doesn't exist, or I think God doesn't exist, they're using a self-referential mind that points beyond matter. But a system cannot fully explain itself from inside of itself. A calculator can't explain math. A book can't explain language. A brain can't explain consciousness without presupposing consciousness. So denial presupposes the thing it denies. With logic, logic isn't an object. You can't weigh it. You can't burn it. You can't evolve it like a limb. Yet logic is universal, invariant, binding. Like even saying logic is a human invention uses logic. That's self-defeating. So logic must be prior to human minds, independent of biology, universally applicable. And that demands a rational ground of reality. And once you admit that, you've left materialism. And I basically said all that to say this: if you are still on the fence of disbelief, I get it. But here's the last thing I guess I'll say. If your mind is the accidental product of non-rational forces, then you have no reason to trust it. And that includes when it tells you that God doesn't exist. Like, that's simple logic. I'm not gaslighting you. If matter is blind and evolution selects for survival and not truth, and consciousness is accidental, then your belief in atheism is just a brain event. Not knowledge, not truth, just chemistry. And before you say, why does God allow murder to happen if he's real? You're assuming that murder is objectively wrong, that it shouldn't happen and someone ought to stop it. And if you don't believe in that, then there's nothing to be upset at. My question already assumes objective morality, which only exists if there's a ground for it, an infinite ground for morality. If God exists. People think God's a cosmic security guard. They call him Sky Daddy or Head Honcho, just pointing in the sky, making sure you do the right thing. But how is he doing that if all of these bad things are happening? It's very obvious that God allows us to have freedom and freedom of choice. Morality requires agency. You to be a good person, to be a moral person, you have to make right or wrong decisions when it comes to interacting with other human beings on this planet. If God prevented every murder, no one could choose to murder. No one could be evil. Sounds good, right? In a perfect world, no one would choose good, though. You didn't choose evil, but you didn't choose good because God is influencing the decisions every single time. You're now a robot. Congratulations, you're a puppet. And so at that point, you don't have morality. You have automation. And when people are like, why didn't God stop the murder? They're almost like blaming God for murdering. Because murder is not caused by God. God did not create murder. Murder is a consequence of being separated from being itself. If God is being, then alignment with being is alignment with love, life, joy. Murder isn't God failing. It's what happens when finite beings like you and I act disconnected from the source. God doesn't endorse murder. He permits freedom, knowing that bad decisions are possible. Because without that freedom, there is no love, there's no virtue, there's no moral responsibility. If God stopped every murder, he'd have to stop the action that led to them. So that includes hatred, lies, exploitation, abuse, etc. Which means stopping thought, stopping desires, stopping choices. And a puppet cannot love God, and that's what you have become at that point. God has given moral law, you shall not murder, puts it in your conscience where you just can't escape it. You see their face every single day in your mind. It inspires justice. Either people want to see you prosecuted in the court of law or, some other sort of justice, but it inspires people to crack down on this type of thing happening to others. Then he calls people to repentance, and then he provides the ultimate judge and or restoration. God doesn't send you to hell because you don't listen. He doesn't send you to hell. You choose hell. You choose to go to hell. You choose to not follow God. Okay, if your reasoning is because if I don't do everything he says, he's going to send me to hell, so I'm not going to follow him anyway. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you're just basically saying I'm not going to follow someone who punishes me if I don't listen to everything that he says. But the things he's telling you to do isn't just random, boring rules. They're for the betterment of your life. There's not one rule that God has that anybody ever did and was worse off doing. So when you don't plug yourself into the outlet, you choose to be in outer darkness. He doesn't do that to you. He doesn't send you anywhere. You choose, you willingly walk to hell. But God doesn't just stay outside the suffering. He literally has entered it before, right? He's entered suffering. He suffered probably the worst out of anybody who has ever suffered. So he understands your suffering. He understands your pain more than anybody could because he experienced more pain than you could ever bear and more humiliation than you could ever think of, more hatred than you could ever feel. So if there's anybody who experienced, it's him. He knows what that's like. He entered that. He felt that. So before you ask yourself, why does God allow these things to happen if he's real? He literally came to the earth, infinite mind wrapped in human flesh, and suffered the same way that we're complaining that people suffer today, but times 10. Christianity is the only worldview where God allows violence and then personally absorbs it for himself. The cross answers the murder question better than any argument. God doesn't eliminate suffering by force. He redeems it by love. I know this was a long watch, but I'm definitely willing to answer any questions in the comment section that you guys have, and willing to expand upon this more, maybe in a shorter part 2. But I wanted to kind of have this video set out because I've been seeing a lot of anti-Christian discourse, and as somebody who wanted to know the truth just because I grew up Christian, and you don't want to just go be a sheep. You want to learn and find out things that you didn't think for yourself. And this was the perfect time for me to do research and actually think about these things thoroughly. And I actually went into way more depth in my research paper, like I said, that I will be putting in the bio and in the description. It's 32 pages. It's a lot. And I do recontextualize a couple of things for you. And I do tell some Bible stories, recontextualize some Bible stories, specifically the Garden of Eden, with the lens that we spoke about today, to make it a lot more digestible to you and understand why us humans are in the positions that we in today, and how our mind kind of works and how Jesus has redeemed all of that. But it came from somebody who struggled with disbelief. I've never been somebody who was a Christian and then became an atheist. I've been in love with God my whole life, but there was a period of time where I said I knew God, and I wasn't following anything like God. I was your typical lukewarm Christian, and even to this day I struggle. But it took me going, I have to sit and think this stuff through for myself, that I started coming to these conclusions that make sense ontologically, they make sense theologically, and morally, and they all add up. And so I thought I would share this with you guys and people who are struggling with their own doubts and don't know if they can turn to God. I'd say if you're going to go to church, go to a non-denominational church. Don't go, some Catholic works for people. I'd say go to a non-denominational church. If you're going to turn your life to Jesus, go to a church that isn't trying to be all extra traditional, and you can't do X, Y, and Z, and you can barely even talk to the pastor and all of that. You want something that makes you feel like a family. And so non-denominational church, possibly a smaller church, instead of those real larger ones, would probably work best for you. But I just wanted to make this video because I just felt like, there's been a lot of creators, even some of my best creator friends, Papa Gut being one of them. I'm just going to say his name. He makes a lot of anti-Christian discourse, and, I'm in this position now God has put me in where, I'm thinking differently than when me and him had our last conversation about the Bible and Christianity and stuff like that. And he got the better of me on that debate. And I didn't have any of this, I didn't have any of this thought process through it. And I was kind of regurgitating the same talking points. And now I'm kind of here with more knowledge and just ready to share it with people. It makes more sense that God exists than he doesn't exist. And you'll see, right? You'll see. You're going to leave this earth at some point, and I guarantee you, you're going to be right. I guarantee you're going to see God, and it doesn't have to be a terrifying experience. You could walk up to him and hug him and love him. It does not have to be this thing. I know Christians, there's evil Christians out there who have consistently shown the word of God, and then will go and do something to kids or go do all of these things. But there's going to be a lot of people who say that they knew Jesus. They didn't know him. And there's a lot of people who are professing his name that aren't doing the stuff that he says at all, and their hearts are completely turned from him. And I'm sorry that you guys have had to deal with those individuals, and for those people who, you know, are still atheists at the end of this video, you know, I can only pray for you. But I would love to hear your position on why you're not going, why you're sticking with, you know, your worldview, and what framework you're kind of using to explain the entire universe. I mean, not even existence, not even the universe. It's gonna do it for me. I'll follow up. If you guys have any serious questions, I'll reply to as many comments as I can. I know this was a long watch. It's gonna take me a while to edit this, but I love you guys. I was happy to do this one, and I understand that it's a little bit confusing at the first watch. It's a bit of a long one, but don't be afraid to, you know, rewind that clock and rewatch this thing all over again. So I love y'all. Peace.